Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Elisa Finston, the Senior Vice President of Community Engagement at the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles. Welcome to the first 100 days, the impact in Los Angeles. We are so honored to be here tonight with Representative Karen Bass, my representative, and our dear friend, Dr. Rafe Sonnenschein of the Pat Brown Institute at Cal State LA. We are so lucky to be in their presence for a discussion of the perspectives of the Black and Jewish communities in Los Angeles during this time, and we look forward to learning from them in just a few minutes. Before we begin, I wanted to share a few things that the Jewish Federation has been working on during the last year. The Federation is the foundation of this community, 365 days a year, in good times and bad. Our job has stayed the same this past year. We identify the greatest challenges facing us and create opportunities to meet those challenges. As always, when the community needs us, we respond in a thoughtful and comprehensive way. This past year, we have expanded assistance to our community members, those already vulnerable and those made newly vulnerable because of the pandemic, through cash assistance to pay emergency bills, more food for the hungry, additional in-home support to our Holocaust survivors and frail seniors, and interest-free loans to businesses and families. We also created a new program to help impacted families afford the cost of preschool and launched a fund to help partner organizations reopen safely. And our work in civic engagement has also continued, which is why we are here tonight. We understand the importance of educating our community on civic issues and connecting our stakeholders to important policymakers and elected leaders at all levels of government. In the virtual world, we've also continued our tradition of celebrating Jewish holidays together, and we were honored to have Representative Bass join us in our virtual Hanukkah celebration just a few months ago. It is now my pleasure to introduce Brian Williams, Chief Operating Officer of the Los Angeles Urban League. The Federation is grateful to the Urban League's partnership, not only on this program tonight, but also on other programs we have done together, as well as future ones to come. It has been an honor to get to know and work with the LA Urban League team, and we thought this was a particularly important conversation for us to do together. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to Brian.
Well, thank you, Elisa. I can't begin to even describe what a pleasure it's been working with Jay Sanderson, Elisa Finston, Rachel Zayden, and Mary Kohab of the Jewish Federation on this speaker series, the first of several, by the way. I'm Brian Williams, Chief Operating Officer and Vice President of the LA Urban League. Our mission at the LA Urban League includes education and information sharing with our stakeholders and clients, and today's conversation is solidly in the wheelhouse of that mission. Our president, former Ambassador Michael Lawson, and our 30-person board of directors, we strive for the Urban League to be the most effective advocate for issues, policies, legislation, and reforms that benefit the Black community and other underserved communities. Our day-to-day work at the Urban League is all about empowering deserving people to get a fair shot at the American dream. We're talking about jobs, education, business ownership, home ownership, access to high-quality healthcare, and now, of course, pandemic relief, COVID testing, COVID vaccination opportunities, and more. So in that context, it is a tremendous pleasure to introduce two special guests whose distinguished careers embody that same kind of commitment and passion. First, Congressmember Karen Bass and author-educator Dr. Raphael Sonnenschein. Trust me, I could take up 20 minutes just introducing these two, but instead I'll try to keep it short and let you hear from them instead. First, Congressmember Karen Bass was just reelected to her 6th term, representing the 37th Congressional District just last November. She serves on the House Committee on Foreign Affairs and the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Crime and Terrorism. Congressmember Bass also served as the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus back in 2019 and 2020. And she has a long history of bringing her colleagues together to introduce transformative legislation. You'll hear about some of that work tonight. And also, importantly, what it means for Los Angeles. Now, prior to her election to Congress, Chairwoman Bass served in the California State Assembly, where she made history by becoming the first ever African-American woman in US history, mind you, to serve as Speaker of any state legislature. Before that, Congressmember Bass founded the Community Coalition, a multiracial community group that is still thriving and building on the great work that she started back in the 1990s. Congressmember Bass is also a proud native of LA and represents the same part of town where she grew up. She's a graduate of Cal State Dominguez Hills and the USC Master's Program in Social Work. It's a great pleasure to have you. Next, Dr. Raphael or Rafe Sonnenschein is the Executive Director of the Pat Brown Institute for Public Affairs at Cal State Los Angeles. Among other things, the Institute is well known for its extensive and groundbreaking surveys of African American and Jewish voters' civic engagement and views. Previously, Dr. Sonnenschein was chair of the Division of Politics, Administration, and Justice at Cal State Fullerton, where he was once named Best Educator and Distinguished College Faculty Member. He received his BA from Princeton and his MA and PhD from a little school in Connecticut, Yale. Dr. Sonnenschein is the author of 3 books on Los Angeles politics and government. He served as executive director of the LA Charter Reform Commission and as executive director of the Los Angeles Neighborhood Council Review Commission, among many other honors and positions. So with that, it's a great honor and with great appreciation that we welcome you to tonight's discussion. Now, for you audience members, please submit your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And now, Rafe, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much and welcome.
Well, thank you, Brian, and thank you, Elisa, these 2 wonderful organizations, the Urban League and the Jewish Federation, that have done and are doing so much for the community and for all communities. It's really great to be part of this. I am having the honor of kind of kicking off a conversation with Congressmember Bass. That's the last time I'm going to call her that during this, because Karen and I have long known each other and have had an arrangement that if I keep calling her Congressmember and she keeps calling me Professor, we'll never actually get to our conversation. So it's respectful and friendly, but I'm Rafe and the Congressmember will be Karen. She was just our distinguished lecturer at the Pat Brown Institute only a few months ago. So it's a wonderful reunion. Karen, it's great to see you again, as always.
Thank you. Good to see you as well.
So I had a bunch of questions for you, as I always do. And I just always love hearing and watching your mind work and watching your experience work. And I'll throw some comments in of my own. But I've been thinking here in LA, DC always seems like it's a million miles away, like nothing there could really matter. And all of a sudden, it seems to me like where you are sitting in Washington, D.C. is right now the most important place on earth. And that hasn't been true until very recently. Let's see what's happened recently. An insurrection that breached the Capitol. It's beyond description. The election of a new president, the change in the Senate to a 50-50, which is essentially a tight Democratic majority, and 3 colossal pieces of legislation, the likes of which I haven't seen since Lyndon Johnson was president. And it's all happening there. And it's all going to affect us out here, isn't it?
Yes.
We heard today that the American Rescue Plan, by a 51-50 vote, put over by the vice president, who's now an LA resident, I may point out, Vice President Kamala Harris, is going to move forward to debate and discussion and all kinds of goofy stuff until next week. And then a bill that you were the principal author of, named after George Floyd, a absolutely transformative bill in policing reform, and the John R. Lewis bill to restore the Voting Rights Act. Has there been anything like this in years? And what do you make of this so far? And what do you think this is going to mean for us here in LA? Especially the American Rescue Act, but the other 2 as well that are so profoundly important.
Well, the good news is the American Rescue Act will be voted out of the Senate at some point next week, but it only needs a majority, which means 50-50 House and the vice president breaking the tie. I can tell you for sure it will pass. And it will mean money in people's pockets right away, $1,400 if you earn under 75,000, tax refund for parents, child care. And you get, a tax refund, you tend to get it all at the end of the year. This is actually given every month. So beginning in July, there'll be a child tax credit that will be given every month, depending on your income level. and then, resources for small businesses and for nonprofit organizations like the Jewish Federation and the Urban League. And I hope that you both apply. When it comes to the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and when it comes to the transformative legislation on democracy, that's a steeper hill to climb because that's going to take 40 votes. But I do have quite a bit of confidence that we will get the Justice and Policing Act over the finish line.
And do you believe, Karen, that that will pass the filibuster, that it will get to 60 votes, or that the filibuster will be put aside by a majority vote in order to get the George Floyd Act through?
I do not believe the filibuster will be put aside. Now, it might be put aside at some point over the next 2 years, but I don't think that that would happen right away. What we have to do is we have to reach agreement to get to 60 votes. And I feel good that there's a lot of political will on both sides of the aisle, but I don't think that it will be exactly the same. Part of the theater of Congress is all you see are our partisan fights, but you don't see what happens 5 minutes after we're away from the cameras, when we're actually talking to each other. And so on Monday night, I'm hosting a dinner, bringing together my Republican colleagues, my Democratic colleagues in the House that are interested in police reform, and say, okay, now let's see where we can land to go over to the Senate and get something on the president's desk.
As long as I've known you, what struck me about you, Karen Bass, is your commitment to justice, fairness, and equality, and your generosity toward people who disagree with you. Some people think you have to stop fighting to be bipartisan, that there's a contradiction between those two things. I remember when you were in the state assembly, when you worked with Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, and you told me a story about how sometimes it seems like you got along better with him than some of the Republican leadership did. What was that all about?
Definitely. They did not like him. They thought he was a rhino, Republican in name only. And those that chose to align with him were immediately kicked out of their leadership spot. But it's not that you stop fighting to negotiate, but you do learn to compartmentalize. So there are Republicans that I work with that are extremely conservative, major supporters of the former president. But we work together on child welfare. We just don't necessarily talk about anything else. But we do talk about that. And to me, my motto is that, are you here to make a point, or are you here to make a difference? If you're here to make a difference, then you're going to look for allies, because at the end of the day, it takes 218 votes. And do the math, you have to get the support of 218 people who agree with you.
Since you're so far away in DC, we often have to learn things. We have to figure things out. If you're the lead sponsor of the George Floyd Act, and it's through the House, you need 10 Republicans in the Senate if you're not going to get rid of the filibuster. Will you be going over to the Senate as the lead author of the bill to try to speak to people to try to help round up those votes, or will that be left to the Senate leadership?
Well, I will tell you what the norm is. You leave it to the leadership and you leave it to the Senate. Now, you asked me what I would do.
Well, that's my real question.
I
don't imagine you're going to sit on the other side of the building and let the grass grow. No?
Nope. I will be talking to the senators, and I've already started that. I mean, there's a number of us, I'm in my 6th term, but there's a number of us that started in the House and moved over to the Senate, like Tim Scott. So Tim and I came in at the exact same time, and there's about 4 senators over there that we all came in at the same time, and so we know each other from being House members, and then when I said 4 or 5, I was only referring to Republicans. There are also Democratic senators that I came with with as well.
I looked up some history today about the 64 and 65, the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65. The filibuster was 67 votes at that point. And they were able to overcome it both times. But the resistance then was the Southern Democrats, and moderate Republicans came aboard for both of those to get well over 70. Obviously, the world is a lot different now.
Well, you know what? There's almost no such thing as either one of those.
That's right.
In terms of, I don't know that there are any more Southern Democrats. I mean, literally, they gerrymandered it in several states. There's one Democrat, and that's an African American. And then moderate Republicans, well, they left a long time ago.
Well, this raises something that's of interest to me. The role of African American politicians, especially women, has changed dramatically. It's not the same as 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. The Vice President of the United States, the prominent position you hold in national politics, and the fact that African American voters are probably the reason Joe Biden is sitting in the White House right now. That's a dramatic change. What do you think? What do you think led to that? I mean, in so many ways, the coalitions now, the African American community is coming from a position of strength in coalition politics that's probably greater than I've seen in my lifetime. Do you
Right.
agree with that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think that what has happened is the organizers have been at work. The organizers have been at work around the country. And of course, the number one organizer is Stacey Abrams. She tried to make the case years ago that we need to expand the electorate. And Rafe, that we've been trying to expand the electorate in California and have done so. So in California, Anthony Thigpen is one of the leaders, but he tends to not be a very public person.
Correct.
People don't know about him. He would never run for office. But Stacey Abrams, everybody knows her name now. And, just think about it. In Georgia, there is a Black man and a Jewish man.
Yes.
Representing the state of Georgia. And, the sad thing about the insurrection is that we didn't even get to celebrate their victory, because after their victory, then people tried to overthrow the government.
Yeah, that took all the fun out of what should have been a great party. It's a remarkable thing, and the Black-Jewish relationship has survived, but it's different now. I mean, in a sense, I think the Jewish community is a supportive role in many ways now, because the Latino community is now such a major partner in coalition politics, more than ever before. Do you think that, people didn't notice the rise of African American women, though? That didn't make it really into the mainstream conversations until we saw the results. What has been the organizing power of African American women in the last 10 years? How has it changed organizing and changed politics, do you think?
I've not really studied it, but I would just question as to whether or not it has really significantly changed, or if it's just now acknowledged.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think we were always there. We were always doing the work. We were always voting consistently, but it really wasn't acknowledged or paid attention to. Now, you might come back and tell me you did some research and I had it all wrong.
Oh, no.
That's
Oh, no.
my observation.
But I think it snuck up on people how powerful it could be in the right circumstance. And an example is the Georgia Senate races, where it made the difference in U.S. history, was changed by that runoff election.
Maybe the other thing is that Black women have been playing more of a visible leadership role. And I think we also are just not going to take it anymore. I mean, in the sense that we're going to sit behind the scenes and not be acknowledged. So, we're here, you have to acknowledge it.
That, I think, is the difference.
Okay.
That the organizing was going on, but now the office holding. And what we see here is people running and not waiting their turn, and being told, wait till the incumbent retires or serves for 90 years, and then maybe that'll be your time. People are saying it's my time right now.
And the other thing is that, women in general have difficulty fundraising. And then, of course, Black women do. I mean, I certainly remember when I started to run the first time, and I wasn't patted on my head, but I might as well have been patted on my head, because what I was told was, oh, that's nice. I mean, you run that little organization in South Central, but we've already picked our candidate, and he's been in the race for a year. He's already raised $100,000. So it's nice that you want to run, but you can't do this. And I launched my campaign in September. That was also why they thought I didn't have a chance, and I won in March.
Yeah. Well, the not waiting the turn has made all the difference. There are no turns in politics. As you know, it's everybody can put their name in, and they should.
Right.
And now women are. It's pretty remarkable. Back in history, Karen, 1992, when Proposition F passed in Los Angeles, just for those of you who don't know, it was the great police reform led by Tom Bradley and Warren Christopher and Maxine Waters and many others, and Mark Ridley Thomas. Spectacular. But what you're putting forward in your bill takes us to a whole new level. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the things that are in there? I mean, I don't know if anybody really knows what qualified immunity is, but I do. It's pretty impactful. What's in that bill that
Right.
makes it so transformative?
So you could divide the bill into 3 or 4 different sections. And the first section of the bill basically will hold police accountable. Because when you saw the man that murdered George Floyd, look at the camera, stick his hand in his pocket. He did that because he felt he could act with impunity. Why? Because no one could sue him. That's what qualified immunity is about. Qualified immunity, removing it from officers will allow them to be civilly responsible. He looked at the camera because he didn't feel that anybody would prosecute him, because the standard to prosecute an officer is so high, you can basically never do it. I mean, we would have to prove that he absolutely meant, he was thinking about it and he meant to kill George Floyd. Now, I'd still make that case because it took 8 minutes and 46 seconds, okay? But what we do in the George Floyd bill is that we lower the standard to prosecute to say you're reckless. So I can't prove what was in your mind, but I can absolutely prove that you were reckless, that you should know if you put your knee on someone's neck for 8 minutes that you were going to kill them. So that's two things. That's the accountability part of the bill. The other part really looks at policing and tries to transform the culture of policing. We have 18,000 police departments in the United States and no national standards, no standards to accreditate police departments. So your barber has to have a license, your barber has to have accreditation, but your police officer does not. And so raising the standards of policing. We ban chokeholds. We ban no-knock warrants, which is what led to Breonna Taylor being killed. We provide for a national registry. So if there are bad officers, they can't just bounce from one department to the next. If you remember Tamir Rice, he would have been 18 years old last year. He was killed when he was 12 years old. Police officer jumped out of the car, saw him with the toy gun and just killed him. 12-year-old child, okay? Now that officer had just been fired from another department for one, being unstable and having a propensity for violence. If that happened after George Floyd, he'd be in a national database and he would have never been hired. And then finally, the bill provides grants to communities so that communities can re-envision policing, re-envision public safety. Uh-oh, you're muted.
No, I don't think there's ever been a bill like this, I have to say. And the fact that it is going to be on its way to the US Senate is a fairly remarkable thing. Let's talk about voting rights for a minute, Karen. Growing up in New Jersey, and this is maybe part of being Jewish as well as experience of other communities, John Lewis was a part of everybody's life because of the inspiration of the civil rights movement. Did you get to know John Lewis very well in the later years? And why is this bill so important, and what's going on in the Supreme Court? And this can affect us everywhere, but tell us a little bit about John Lewis.
Well, yes, I did have the incredible honor of serving with him. And I will just tell you, hands down, he was the most respected member of Congress, both houses, Senate, House, very, very well respected. When John Lewis spoke, no one said anything. Can I tell you a funny story about
Of course.
One day we were actually passing some amendments and legislation about voting rights, and one Republican member made a mistake of offering an amendment that would have cut funding to enforce, what was going, to protect voting. And I guess Mr. Lewis had heard him in his office. He came running down to the floor, and that member of Congress withdrew his amendment and apologized to him in public. Never seen anything like that happen.
That is deep respect.
Yeah, absolutely. It was like, I don't know why you messed with John Lewis. That was not a smart thing. He would, I would go and talk to him and he would say, Karen, would you call me John? And I'm like, no, Mr. Lewis, I'm not calling you John. I can't call you John. But, one of the most remarkable things about him is that he was aside from being just so well respected and an absolute icon to everybody, he was the most humble person. The most humble person. If ever you tried to push him forward, he tried to push you forward. And I don't care who stopped and wanted to talk to him or who wanted a picture with him, he would stop and look you in the eye and take a picture with you. And I think that real symbolic to me was his final public picture. Do you remember that? He was in Black Lives Matter Square. And you could
Yes.
look at him and you could see he was really thin because, you know, the cancer had really had a big impact. And he was standing in Black Lives Matter Square, and it was so symbolic of a handoff, of a baton to the next generation, and an okay, kind of like an approval, you know?
So this,
I'm leaving, and now it's up to you.
and therefore we pick up the thread with this bill, the
Yeah.
John R. Lewis bill. So what's in that bill? What does it mean for all of us? What do you think its prospects are? It's extremely important, I think.
Well, when the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act several years ago, and ironically, while that debate was going on at the Supreme Court, we were on the Hill. President Obama was here, and he was dedicating a statue to Rosa Parks while the debate on gutting the Voting Rights Act was happening.
Unbelievable.
And so basically, you know, the Supreme Court said, well, I don't really think this is an issue anymore. And if you guys want to have voting rights, then you need to prove it to the courts why you still need it. Now, you know, within hours of that court decision, states all across the country, definitely the South, but not just the South, immediately passed voting restrictions. And so what we have had to do since then, and actually the John Lewis Voting Rights Act was not voted on yet. That is going to be voted on later in the year. Other parts of voting rights was voted on.
Okay.
So the John Lewis bill answered the Supreme Court issue of proving that there is a problem. The point that the Supreme Court made that I would agree with is that this was just focused on the South. Well, we all know that it's not a problem just in the South. It's nationwide. It's wherever there's changing demographics. That's when all of a sudden you become concerned about voting. And I just have to tell you that there's some people in our country that basically said the votes were illegal in these states where the demographics either had changed or there's a large African-American and Latino population, because they don't think we should vote. I mean, just period. And you know, when the debate was happening at the Supreme Court this week, I'm sure you heard the audio tape, when the newest Supreme Court justice asked about Arizona, and basically the lawyer for the Republicans said, well, if those people vote, we won't win elections.
Right.
Forget democracy.
It's funny that they had the confidence to say that, though, and not feel that that would get them laughed out of the Supreme Court. That was what struck me.
Well, but you know what? It's the arrogance and it's the permission that was given over the last 4 years to be openly racist. And I do have to divert just a second, Rafe, to tell you that, you know, I also focus on foreign policy. And that was the part of me that you didn't know.
Right.
Because, you know, at Community Coalition, foreign policy has always been a major love of mine. And in Congress, I get to do both domestic and foreign policy. So I travel to Africa all the time. I do election observation in other countries. And we don't have a leg to stand on right now. We don't. I mean, I was in January, I had a Zoom call with all 54 ambassadors from Africa, the African Union. And I was basically saying, you know, new session, blah, 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 Africa's important. And I did it a week after we had an insurrection. Every single thing that happened in our election is what we put sanctions on other countries for doing. And so we have a lot to clean up. And I don't think we think about it when we have problems like the execution of somebody in public like George Floyd, or just open racism at the border, or restricting people's voting rights. We don't think about what we look like on the stage.
Karen, what do you say to a young person who sees a new president with a new agenda, that the Democrats control both houses of Congress, and say, How come it can't get done faster? Can't you just basically tell people the majority's there? I mean, what do you want to tell them about working in Washington for justice and equality passionately? Not to say it would take forever, but what information do we need to share with them to sort of process the process to get
Well,
to where you need to get to?
so here's what I'd say. Congress can take 10 days or 10 years to move. And what can make the difference is organizing and activism. Now, you said a few minutes ago that when we were talking about George Floyd, that you don't ever imagine, because it hadn't happened, and you're right, a bill like George Floyd, Justice and Policing Act in Congress. Well, that bill was passed 30 days after he was murdered. Why? Because the young people are in the streets. And so what I would say is, if we move too slow, if you organize, you can help us move a lot quicker. And organizing today with all of the tools of technology, they really are the generation that can bring about monumental change.
What would you have done at the Community Coalition if you had had the social media tools that people have today and the technology people have today when you were there in 1991 and 1992?
Yeah, well, first of all, half of those tools I still don't know how to use.
I'm with you on that.
I have a young person on my staff.
Well, there you go. Me too.
But it would have allowed us to communicate with people. First of all, I don't think you can't train door knocking to anything. Social media and that's a struggle, actually. That's a generational struggle with younger staff and younger activists. An email is actually not full communication, and nor is a text. Picking up a phone and talking to somebody actually is how you build a relationship. And relationships count. It's pretty hard to have an email relationship. You can use email after you have a relationship, but I think it just would have allowed us to expand and to do so much more, so much quicker.
I have to say, though, your office then, when I met you and dropped in there and put my feet up and sat and talked to you, was filled with young people. It wasn't that you were short of young people to work there. They were jazzed. They were excited. They were going out and doing stuff. I want you to know that I have often referred to your experience when students say to me, I'd like to go into politics. What should I do? I got to get a law degree, and then maybe I got to go work, for an elected office and blah, blah, blah. I say, you know what? Organize.
Right.
Because the best public officials are the best organizers. In fact, if most of them were organizers, I think people would have a different attitude, because organizing, you got to go door to door and talk to people about what they care about. You're not really selling, right?
Well, also on the other side of it, the side I'm on now, is I happen to believe that the best policy for issues we work on, the best policy, you need to have the people that are most effective involved in the policy making. Otherwise, and you can be well-intentioned. I mean, case in point, COVID and vaccine distribution. Now, you know that the Biden administration is completely well-intended, very different than a few months ago. And so putting vaccine distribution online and telling everybody to go in and register, well-intended. Doesn't work in some communities, which is why you have people from outside of the inner city probably making their first trip ever to the inner city to get a shot that everybody in the inner city needed.
It's funny how people at the top levels of government don't start with organizing first. It's organizing last after everything else doesn't work. Well, then you say, is there an organizer around here who can figure out how we can get this vaccine around?
Well, or how about pick up the phone and call somebody in the neighborhood and say what works in your neighborhood? The problem is that people see themselves as experts. And so if I'm an expert and, I should know this is the way we should do it. And it's like that just made no sense. Now the problem is all of the focus on vaccine hesitancy. And I'm really going to challenge that. Because, if you focus on vaccine hesitancy, then all you're doing is creating an excuse to not give people the vaccine. I, by the way, just finished a poll, which I'm happy to share with you. And that poll shows that the number one issue is access, not hesitancy. And if you focused on access, then those people that were hesitant, well, guess what? They're friends and family members of the people that wanted it.
Right. You know, it's a subtle thing you're saying now is when people don't participate, they say they don't want to participate. And then you knock down a barrier to participation and they're standing outside your door ready to talk to you. But they don't start by saying, I don't have the access, because they've already priced in the lack of access as the reason not to want to participate, because they assume it won't change.
Right.
You're right. But I presume you're telling the president all of this.
Yes. Well, but his team, that's for sure. Because if you focus on the people that want it, they will be able to help the folks that don't, because they'll see everything is fine. I've had both my shots. I tell people when I go to the grocery store, I always talk to the cashiers. Have you had your shot? I had mine and I'm fine.
That's great. How's our vice president doing?
I think she's doing great.
I mean, is she having a good time? Is she enjoying herself? Is she
Well, I've not
swamped with everything?
I have not talked to her, but she seems as though she is doing absolutely fine and enjoying herself from the people that are in regular contact with her. I've not wanted to bother her. We'll be meeting with her soon. But, you know, to me, for the president and the vice president and most of the administration, I've tried to stay away. They need a moment.
Yeah.
They walked in. I mean, my joke is for the cabinet secretaries, they get the keys to their office and there's no telling what they're going to find.
That is true. That is true.
What they won't find are people, because I think, you know, so many of the agencies were hollowed out with people that left.
Yeah. And no one was going to help them have a transition anyway. Although my guess is in some ways they may have benefited from not having that experience shared with them by some of the folks who were there, I would imagine. I think we're going to take some questions. Is that right? Elisa and Brian, are we ready for some questions?
Yeah, we're definitely ready. It's fun to come on screen with you. So thank you both so much for such an interesting conversation. We have a question that's come in, and Rafe, you mentioned this earlier. You mentioned the Bradley Coalition and how it was such a powerful force in Los Angeles, and it was a really close collaboration between the Black and the Jewish communities. So a question has come in. I'd love to get both of your opinions on what role do you think Black and Jewish relations have had in the development of the crucial legislative initiatives that the Congress member mentioned earlier in the discussion.
Well, I could defer to Karen on that, and I can comment a bit on that as well.
Well, the question is, what role has the Black and the Jewish community? I'm not.
In the current legislation, Elisa? Or you mean in historic legislation?
I think historic, and people were asking about historic, but then also sort of the coalition today and where that stands and the need to strengthen it, and what needs to be done to strengthen the coalition to continue to impact things at the local and the federal level.
Well, maybe I could start with the historical and pass it over to Karen, if that's okay, because you never step in the same river twice. History moves on and things change. And what I would set up what Karen is doing now in Washington, the Black Jewish Coalition was crucial to most progressive legislation in LA until probably the early 1990s. And after that, there was really a big shift because of the rise of the Latino community as a major activist, along with the African American community, creating coalitions of color that were very, very dynamic. And I think there's still a strong role for the Jewish community, but I think it's no longer what you might call an exclusive relationship. I think it's a broader relationship now. And therefore, it's good to respect the history, but not be trapped by the history into having a different kind of expectation. So Karen, that's just my historical take on it.
No, I think you are 100% right. I think times are different. And I know that when we work in the community and when we work in Congress, I don't know that we really focus on that, meaning members of Congress, some are Jewish and some are not. So I'm not really sure. It might be more appropriate for Brian. I don't know if the Urban League is doing anything explicit in Black Jewish coalition building. When I put coalitions together, I put coalitions together based on a topic. based on an issue. And then the people that come to the table are the people that are impacted by that issue.
Yeah, well, I will say that what we're doing today is just scratching the surface of helping to rebuild and strengthen the coalition between Blacks and Jews in the city and county. So next question for you, Congressmember Bass. You know, in progressive and activist circles, people don't talk so much, or we don't celebrate the idea of just getting back to normal after COVID. And instead, we know it's going to be a long recovery. It's going to take many years. We hope few, but possibly many years to recover from the damage done to children's education, to black business class, and to working class people in general. So instead, we talk about building back better. So what does building back better look like to you, and from a legislative standpoint or from a community standpoint?
Let me give you a couple of very specific examples. Education. There was already an achievement gap. Now that achievement gap is going to be as wide as the Pacific Ocean, because you have kids who have been out of school for 12 months. And depending on the circumstances of the individual family, I don't know how you can expect an essential worker, a person that has to be to work, and their kids are at home or with a sitter, and they're supposed to manage a Zoom call. I have a 6-year-old grandson. You want to see what a 6-year-old has to do Zooming for 4 hours a day with 15-minute breaks? And so to me, building back better means when we are past COVID, you don't just go back to business as usual. There's going to have to be massive intervention to close the achievement gap that has widened. Where in more affluent areas where people are using tutors and doing different things, you know, it really is going to be bad. And then in terms of healthcare, so we all learned, or I would say part of the country learned, that certain populations have underlying health conditions. We learned that last year. And so now when we're past COVID, you don't just go back to that. Why don't we address the underlying health conditions that made certain populations vulnerable in the first place? Those are two examples. And then to have a president that comes in talking about racial equity is just profound. I mean, in his inauguration speech, he used the term white supremacy. Can you imagine if Barack Obama had done that? Oh, Lord. Biden is going to be able to do so much more on race than Obama would have ever been able.
Thank you. Elisa, go ahead.
Oh, sure. A question that has come in from the audience for you, Congressmember. There are over 350,000 single parent households in LA County. Many parents like me are afraid to send our kids back to school because of the potential risk of infecting us. As the sole providers and protectors of our families, how can our legislators and administrators acknowledge the threat this could have on Black families, where a large percentage of all Black families in our LA, are from single parent families?
Well, I mean, I think that we're going to have to figure out how we can get back to school safely. And I've not been intimately involved with LA Unified, but I imagine that things are being considered, like having students go in shifts so that there can be social spacing. I mean, it wasn't that long ago we had year-round school. Now, we had year-round school because we didn't have enough schools. Now we have enough schools, but we need to have social distancing. I would imagine that would be one of the things. I know certainly vaccinating the teachers is clear. And I am hoping, I think the president said that by the end of summer, we might be able to have the vaccine for certain young people. And so clearly that is the ultimate answer. But in the meantime, you know, when young people are back in school again, I think there's going to need to be very aggressive intervention.
Absolutely. Another question. You know, there between the new vice president and many of the cabinet members, there's been a lot of talk about California now being pretty well represented in the administration. So how do you think that California influence will trickle down to the communities in LA and elsewhere in California and impact decisions in California?
Well, let me also add, in addition to what you just said, the Speaker of the House is from California, even though she's from that other state. But we also have chairs of key committees from California. You know, you have Maxine Waters, the chair of the Financial Services Committee that covers housing. which is obviously very critical to us in Los Angeles. So I think California is well represented. You know, there is this saying in DC, ABC, anybody but California. You know, because I tell you, one of the things about California, I mean, my experience in being in DC is we are just so big. And you kind of know that theoretically, but when you come and you interact with some of the other states, and you know, I think it's one of the structural problems in our democracy is that you can have a state that has 600,000 people and they have 2 senators, and you can have a state with 40 million and they have 2 senators. And so I do think that California is going to benefit quite well.
I would just like to add something to that. Historically, California did once have a big role in national government, but only under the Republicans. The Republicans were the first ones to bring California into national politics, and the Democrats, despite it being a blue state, pretty much used California as an ATM machine for campaign contributions and didn't take it very seriously because it was an East Coast, Midwest party. This year, I've been just thrilled not only to see Californians going, but Southern Californians going to Washington, because within California, Northern California was dominant over LA. Did you know that LA County by itself would be the ninth largest state in the country? So talk about the size that the Congress member is talking about. But it's nice to see the Democratic Party really taking California Democrats seriously. It's kind of about time.
Well, thanks. I'm going to say that to all of my friends. I'm from LA County and we're the 9th largest state in the country.
We should get 2 senators.
Exactly.
Okay, I think it's my turn. So we had a question come in before the event about food insecurity, which is something that our organizations obviously work on to, help the most vulnerable in Los Angeles. And, the audience is curious, what policies will it take to ensure that we're moving towards ending food insecurity?
I wish I could point to a policy that would end food insecurity. That's another one of those points of international embarrassment. In the country that is the richest country in the history of the world, and we can't figure out how to feed all our people. I will tell you, though, that I started off my morning today speaking with Secretary Vilsack, the new agriculture secretary. And I will tell you, I had no idea all that the Secretary of Agriculture was responsible for. Well, one of the things he's responsible for is food insecurity. And I am very, very hopeful, very, very good about the fact that he is going to do the maximum he can versus the last administration that tried to restrict food, that, did everything they could to make food more inaccessible. And so the requirements that they had on SNAP, or they tried to put on SNAP, we don't have to worry about. So I feel good that he will do the most he can, but it will not be enough, because there just shouldn't be food insecurity. All of us know all you have to do is go in a grocery store. What do they do with all that food? I mean, we waste millions and millions of tons of food.
So another audience question for both of you. The question is about Black organizing being erased in Los Angeles. So the question is, what can political organizers and both in the Black community and in communities of allies do today to help stabilize the Black community in LA? The current 8 to 9% of LA County is down dramatically from the numbers in the 90s and before, due to displacement, gentrification, housing costs, a whole panoply of issues. So what can allies and organizers and politicians do together to help stabilize and strengthen the Black community?
Well, first of all, I do not believe Black organizing is going to be erased, but in terms of gentrification and displacement, what I think we have to do is to do everything we can to make sure that there's not further displacement, because it's huge. I mean, again, Black folks have not recovered from the 2010 recession, especially in terms of the loss of homeownership. And now we have the pandemic. And so there is the potential for there to be even further loss. And one of the big things that we have to fight are speculators that come in and try to take your property or, either try to trick you into selling your property or put liens on it. There's all kinds of schemes that are done, especially for the elderly. I had to have an entire town hall because of this, because elderly Black folks were just being outright preyed upon and losing their property. So it's about defending what we already have and fighting any policies that would lead to further loss.
And I would agree that organizing is not going anywhere. But when you look at the disproportionate representation of African Americans in LA County in the homeless population, which
Right.
is essentially 4 times their share of the population, that is a barrier toward organizing. But it's not holding back organizers. But there's something has to be done for housing stability for people, because housing stability is a key aspect of being able to talk to people, to be able, as we're describing, for organizing. So that is just sticking out like a sore thumb, and that has got to be addressed.
Absolutely agree.
And just to follow up on that, part of the issue with homelessness in particular has to do with the massive amount of regulation and the red tape involved with, building transitional housing, building low income or affordable housing, and overcoming neighborhood opposition to housing less fortunate people in their backyards. So, Congressman Bash, you've been in the position of being a community organizer, a state legislator, and also now a national legislator. So, what do you see as some solutions for that issue?
Solutions for what? I'm sorry?
For lowering the barriers and the red tape associated with helping to resolve the homelessness issue.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, again, we're very fortunate to have a champion like Maxine Waters in Congress, and that's her area, and soon to be HUD Secretary Marcia Fudge. And I absolutely believe that they will do everything they can. But one of the major hurdles is how much it costs to build every unit, and I'm sure you have heard that. There has to be some easier solution. And I feel bad, frankly, for the county supervisors and city council members, because I feel they have done a lot. But when I have town hall meetings, people feel like nothing's been done. And they voted for these ballot measures, nothing happened. But what the ballot measures didn't account for were new people coming into homelessness.
Right.
So while they've been able to move people out of homelessness, just as many people have become homeless. And that was something that, maybe could have been anticipated, but I'm not sure what could be done with. I'm interested in looking for creative ways to do housing where you don't, they're spending like over $400,000 a unit. And I know there have been times when I've been out of the country. One time I was in South Sudan, and I arrived at night, and it was a very dangerous area. So they had us in special housing on a compound. And I remember when I woke up the next morning, I had a nice 1-bedroom apartment, living room, the whole 9 yards. When I woke up in the morning and walked out of my unit, I was in a container. But you would have never known I was in a container. It was a very nice place. And it just seems like there should be ways to do inexpensive housing quickly. And I think that somehow we're going to have to figure out how to get there, because we need to do housing in massive numbers.
And there's still discrimination in housing, even when we're talking about rehousing people who are homeless. And there's a recent report, actually a few years ago, of the Ad Hoc Committee on Black Homelessness, which I recommend to everybody, done sponsored by LAHSA. It's a wonderful report. And it talks about people with Section 8 vouchers having a difficult time using those vouchers, basically getting into the unit. And we can't forget that housing discrimination has not gone away.
Right.
We just don't talk about it very much.
We have I think we have time for one final question. And I think this is a good way to wrap up. What can everyday people do to have their voices heard? Talk to us about how can we be the best advocates on the issues that we talked about today?
Well, I think the average person doesn't realize that when they email or when they call a congressional office, it makes a difference. we all pay attention to the calls that we get and the emails that we get. And so the mere fact that you pick up the phone and call is important, even though people aren't answering the phones now because nobody's here. Messages are taken and we track all of that. And so I would appeal to you to help me get the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act passed in the Senate. And so you could call Senator Tim Scott, give him some love, you know, because you don't always call the person when you're mad at them. Call them and encourage them. Call the Republicans that voted for impeachment and say something nice to them, encourage them, and say that we need to work together. And those folks that took that stand against the president, not only do they have to worry about the reelection, they have to worry about their physical safety now.
I would follow the advice I've seen Karen Bass take very often, which is say thank you to the people who have done the right thing. And with the people who you think are going to do the wrong thing, search for the part of their humanity that you have a connection to, which is something I've heard her say many times. And for Karen Bass, she often found people who cared about foster care. Right. And that was an issue of deep concern to her. Well, she was able to find other people who had that. When you call the office of the people you don't like, don't scream at the unfortunate staff person who picks up the phone. Say, I know you're working really hard, but I just want you to know I think your boss is wrong about this and there's a better way to go. And I thank you for listening to me. You know and what? That makes all the difference.
You know what, Ray? The racist vitriol that the poor interns have to, I mean, sometimes you have to take them off. And it's like they always panic when I go on TV, or especially if I go on Fox. Oh my word. It's just and I don't know. I mean, to me, I don't know. It's really incredible what exists in this country currently, but what was really facilitated, encouraged by the last administration. He wounded our country deeply.
And I'd add to that you can still fight for justice with all of your heart and be kind to people in all different locations that you come across, but you never give up the vision you're fighting for in order to win their favor.
Absolutely.
Yeah, those are really great closing thoughts, Rafe. Thank you very much. Any other closing thoughts, either from the Congress member or from you, Rafe?
I will defer to the Congress member.
I just want people to know that even though we have been through an incredible year, I mean, just think about it for a minute. What could you have ever imagined that the entire planet would experience at the same time? Mm-hmm. Everyone on Earth experienced the same thing. And we've been through tough times, but I'm extremely hopeful and excited and feel like we are on the verge of getting past the last 4 years, but actually making things better, that we actually have a president now. Every time he gets up and speak, I just go, like, that's right, that's how a president acts. You know that he genuinely cares. And so I have complete confidence that we will get past this. And I do believe that things will be made better. So I just thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. And this was a fun hour, and I hope we stay in touch and engaged.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to everybody. It was a great experience. Great to be part of it.
Talk to you soon, Ray.
Bye-bye, Karen. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.